She didn't even get a scream out before the world flipped upside down. One hard yank on the rope around her ankles, and Lydia Moore left the ground, skirts flying, hair spilling toward the dust. The sun above Dodge City burned like a furnace. The whole prairie shimmered while she hung there, upside down, swinging from a rough wooden frame in the middle of nowhere, trying to understand how a simple morning inside her own home had turned into a nightmare she couldn't escape. Her husband had snapped again. Folks in town whispered that Tom Moore had a temper. They didn't know the half of it. They didn't see him tie the rope around her ankles while she kicked and begged him to stop. They didn't hear Lydia cry out when he hauled her up until her dress slid toward her shoulders and the blood rushed to her head. Tom's breath reeked of whiskey, and his eyes were wild and unfocused, like a man who had lost all sense of what was right and what was madness. Somewhere in the struggle, her thigh slammed against a splintered beam and tore open, warm blood soaking through the thin fabric. Today his anger had gone further. Today he had left her hanging there under the open sky and warned her not to move a muscle until he said so. Then he rode off toward Front Street like nothing happened, like she wasn't even human. The heat pressed down on her. Her head pounded with every slow swing of her body. She tasted blood on her lip and the bitter dust that floated up from the ground beneath her. The rope bit into her ankles. Another coil dug into her wrists and waist, holding her tight against the rough wood. One eye was swelling shut. She felt like the whole world was shrinking to the sound of her own pulse. Time slipped by in slow, painful breaths. Dodge City was just a thin blur far across the flats, upside down and wavering in the heat. She wondered if anyone would ever help her at all. She didn't know it yet, but someone was already riding her way. Someone who was about to change the course of her whole life. That was when she saw dust rising on the horizon. A single rider, tall, steady, moving closer with a calm rhythm. The sun flashed against the metal on his saddle. For a moment, she feared Tom had come back to finish what he started. But when the rider came into focus, she recognized the face, Ethan Walker. The quiet rancher who never said more than he needed to. The man who often tipped his hat when passing her fence. The man her husband hated without reason. Her heartbeat jumped. She didn't know if she should call out or stay silent, and she didn't know what he would do when he realized the truth. Ethan slowed his horse the moment he saw her hanging there in the heat. Her dress was bunched around her waist, her legs bound tight to the frame. A dark patch of blood on her thigh. For a second he thought she might pass out right in front of him. He slid off the saddle and stepped closer, careful and steady, like he would approach a spooked mare on a bad day. Lydia tried to twist away, but the ropes only dug in deeper. Ethan stopped a few feet away. His voice was low and soft. He said her name once, just that. Lydia blinked, surprised that someone said her name like it mattered. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but all that came out was a thin breath. Ethan reached up slowly, his hand open, ready to steady her if she swung too hard. He studied the knots, the way the rope crossed her legs and hips, the blood soaking through the cloth. If he was going to get her down without breaking her neck, he had to work close. Too close. He slid his hand along the rope at her thigh, searching for the right place to cut. His fingers brushed the bare skin just above the wound. Lydia sucked in a sharp breath, her face flushed with pain and embarrassment. Her voice came out in a shaky whisper. "Don't move your hand there. Don't take advantage." For a heartbeat, Ethan froze. Any passerby would see only a rancher with his hands under a woman's skirt out in the middle of the prairie. It was the kind of picture that could ruin a man. But then he looked at the blood, at the way her body trembled. He did the unthinkable. He ignored what people might say and did what had to be done. He gripped the rope, slid his knife in close to her skin, and cut her free. She dropped into his arms with a heavy jolt. The sudden rush of blood away from her head made her gasp. Ethan carried her a few steps and laid her gently in the grass. He tore a strip from the lower edge of her dress, tight around the wound on her thigh to slow the bleeding. Only then did he help her sit up. He handed her his canteen. She drank slow because her hands were trembling, and Ethan pretended not to notice even though he noticed everything. Two people who barely knew each other, yet somehow understood more in silence than most folks did in hours of talking. Lydia felt a strange sense of safety she had not felt in years. It scared her. It comforted her. It confused her. Ethan finally asked the question, sitting heavy in his chest. He kept his voice gentle. He asked her if someone had done this to her. Lydia froze. Her fingers tightened around the canteen. Her eyes shifted toward town, toward the house she had come from, toward the man waiting inside it. And the real question now was this: would Lydia tell him the truth before it was too late? Lydia didn't answer Ethan right away. She held the canteen so tight her knuckles turned pale. The warm wind brushed past them, carrying the smell of dust and cattle from somewhere far across the flats. Ethan waited with the patience of a man who had seen too much in life to rush anyone. Lydia finally took a shaky breath. She whispered that she had fallen again, but her voice cracked and betrayed her before she even finished the sentence. Ethan didn't press her, though he knew the truth was standing right there between them. You can tell a lot from the look in a person's eyes. Hers showed fear, shame, and something else, something like hope, that maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. Ethan saw all of it. He also saw the fresh marks across her arms and the bruise rising along her cheek. There are things a simple fall cannot do. Just as Lydia opened her mouth to speak, the distant rumble of hooves rolled across the prairie. Both of them looked up. A rider was coming fast from the direction of Dodge City. Lydia stiffened the second she recognized the saddle and the way the rider leaned forward. It was Tom. That alone made Ethan shift his stance, not to fight, but to be ready for whatever trouble was heading their way. Tom pulled his horse hard when he reached them. Dust exploded around his boots as he jumped down. His eyes locked on Ethan with a cold stare that made Lydia flinch. Tom asked what Ethan thought he was doing out here with another man's wife. He said a bunch of things in that sharp, mean tone of his, the kind of voice a man uses when he wants the whole world to know he's angry and wants the world to stay scared. Before Ethan could answer, Tom grabbed Lydia by the arm. She winced. That was all it took. Ethan stepped forward and told Tom to let her go. His voice was still calm, but there was no give in it. Tom laughed in that way drunk men do, even when they aren't drunk. Then he warned Ethan to stay out of his marriage. Lydia stared at the ground, embarrassed, scared, and desperate for someone to believe her for once. Ethan met Tom's eyes. He didn't raise his hands or threaten or shout. He only said one simple thing. He told Tom that hurting someone doesn't make a man strong. It makes him small. The words hung in the hot air like a spark near dry grass. And the moment Tom heard that, something in him changed. His pride lit up like fire, and trouble was about to follow. Now I have to ask you something. If you enjoy stories like this, feel free to subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. Also, grab a cup of tea and tell me, what time is it where you are and where are you listening from? Tom didn't forget the way Ethan spoke to him out on that prairie. A man like Tom never lets a moment like that settle. It sits inside him like a hot coal, burning hotter each hour. By the time the sun started dropping behind Dodge City, that anger was ready to spill. Lydia knew it too. She felt it the moment she stepped back into her house. The air inside was tight and heavy, like the walls themselves knew what was coming. Ethan spent the evening checking his fences and his cattle, but his mind wasn't on the work. He kept replaying the look in Lydia's eyes when Tom grabbed her arm. A quiet man can ignore a lot, but he cannot ignore someone who needs help, especially not when that someone keeps trying to hide the pain she carries. When a storm rolls in over the plains, you can smell the trouble long before you see it. Ethan smelled that storm in Tom's anger. It was near full dark when Ethan heard the horses, several of them. Their hooves hit the ground with that quick, choppy rhythm that tells you the riders aren't out for a friendly visit. Ethan set down the lantern and stepped out onto the porch. Dust drifted across his yard, glowing in the moonlight. Then he saw them, Tom and two of his drinking buddies, riding straight toward his barn. Lydia wasn't with them. That alone told Ethan everything he needed to know. The men rode in close and circled the barn like buzzards. Tom slid down first. He called out Ethan's name, loud and mocking, as if he wanted the whole prairie to hear. He accused Ethan of turning his wife against him. He accused him of interfering in matters that weren't his. Then he said something that made Ethan's jaw tighten. Tom claimed he was there to take back what belonged to him. No matter who got hurt along the way, Ethan took one slow step forward. He kept his voice calm, steady, the way a man does when he refuses to let another man shake him. He told Tom this wasn't the way to fix anything. He told him to walk away before he did something he couldn't undo. Tom laughed. It was the same cruel laugh he used earlier, but louder this time. His two friends stepped down too, hands twitching near their belts. The air snapped tight. The night felt smaller. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. And right then, standing in that dusty yard with three angry men closing in, Ethan felt it. Something was about to break wide open. But the real question now was this: who would make the first move, and who would pay the price for it? The moment felt frozen. The men stood in the yard with the moon hanging overhead like a dim lantern. Ethan didn't move. He waited, steady as an old fence post that had survived 1,000 storms. Then the first man charged. Ethan stepped to the side at the last second, felt the rush of air as the man's fist missed his jaw and drove his shoulder hard into the man's ribs. The man hit the dirt with a grunt, kicking up dust that stung Ethan's eyes. Ethan didn't want this fight. He never did. But there are moments when a man has to stand his ground or lose himself for good. The second man swung wildly and missed. Ethan ducked low, felt the knuckles skim his hair, and answered with a short, hard punch to the gut. The second man folded for a moment, gasping for air, but Ethan didn't chase him. He kept turning, kept his back away from the barn wall, always watching all three men at once. Then Tom came in, wild-eyed, swinging more anger than skill. Ethan caught one punch on his forearm, felt the sting all the way to his shoulder, and realized again that he was outnumbered but not outmatched. Sparks flew off the lantern when someone kicked it over. The whole scene shook with dust and noise, yet in Ethan's mind it felt strangely clear. Back in town, Lydia sat in the quiet kitchen, staring at the door. She had heard the hooves when Tom and his two buddies thundered past the house, heard his angry voice drift back through the open window. A neighbor boy ran by and muttered that Tom was heading toward Ethan Walker's place, spoiling for a fight. That was enough. She lit a lamp with shaking hands and stepped out into the night. The road wasn't far, maybe a mile across the flats, and she knew the way by heart. She had walked part of that road more times than she could count. The night was dark, but the sound of shouting carried over the fields and pulled her forward. When she reached the edge of Ethan's yard, she froze. She saw Tom swinging at Ethan. She saw the two friends circling like wolves, and she saw Ethan fighting only to defend, never to destroy. Something inside Lydia rose up. The fear that had ruled her for years finally cracked. She stepped forward, lifted the lamp, and shouted Tom's name. Her voice shook. But she didn't. All three men turned. For the first time, Tom looked surprised. Lydia told him to stop. She told him she wouldn't live in fear anymore. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a kind of strength only a person who has lived through real pain can find. Tom lunged toward her. Ethan intercepted him with one firm move and pinned him to the ground. The fight was over, because the truth finally stood there in the open. Out by the fence line, old Mr. Harris had seen Tom and his buddies ride in and heard the shout and carry across the fields. He sent his youngest boy racing toward Dodge City to get the sheriff. So when Ethan finally had Tom in the dirt, Sheriff Collins and a deputy were already thundering up the lane. They saw the torn yard, the bruises on Lydia, the guns half drawn, and it didn't take long for them to see who had started the trouble. The sheriff put Tom in irons right there in the dust, and for once Tom had no clever words left. Weeks later, the courthouse in Dodge City was full. Folks who had heard the stories lined the back wall, hats in their hands, boots quiet on the floor. The judge listened as Lydia told what had happened, her voice calm but firm. The doctor spoke about the bruises he had seen before. Ethan told the truth in plain, simple words, the way a rancher talks when he has nothing to hide. Even a few neighbors spoke up, admitting they had heard the shouting on too many nights. By the time Tom tried to talk his way out of it, the room was already against him. The judge banged his gavel and made it clear. Tom would face charges for what he had done, and Lydia had every right to seek a divorce. When the papers were finally signed, Lydia walked out of that courthouse lighter than she had felt in years. The sky over Dodge City looked a little wider. The air felt easier to breathe. She looked at the horizon, and for the first time in a long time, she felt hope instead of dread. Ethan walked beside her, not pushing, not assuming, just being there. Sometimes a person doesn't need a hero. They just need someone steady enough to stand with them while they rebuild their life. And here's the part that might matter most. Every one of us has a storm we're trying to outrun, but storms don't last forever. What matters is the courage it takes to step out of them. If you enjoyed this story, a simple like helps more than you think. And if you want to hear more tales from the Old West, feel free to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Now tell me, where are you listening from today, and what time is it for you right now?